And action.
Hello and welcome to a special live broadcast from a band who first hit the airwaves back in 2006. The track is called Sea Within a Sea. The band are the Horrors.
Hey guys, and welcome to a new winter. We've been mixing it up a bit more recently, not just doing scary stories, but now we're doing other types of content, including films and episodes like this, where we talk about music, and we take albums that we like, or that you guys like, because you can, have a say as well, and we discuss them at length. And so joining me on this episode is Dan. Hi, Dan.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, good. So me and Dan have known each other since we were like 5, I'd say, and our love of music is almost as strong as our love for each other.
Forged in blood.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so Dan, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing at the moment.
As you know, we got into music together, so really it was kind of like a lot of 90s alternative rock and indie rock and a bit of punk. So that's kind of like where my heart is, but I also listen to just like a ton of music. And they always say like when you hit 30 that your tastes are set in stone. But I'd say mine have just gone kind of like broader and broader and broader. I speak a lot on, I'm active on Instagram, and I just post records and thoughts about them. So there's a lot of like post-punk, some like crappy 80s pop I'm quite partial to. I'm getting more into like Afrobeat and funk, and I just inherited a big box of like classic jazz records. So yeah, if you're interested in just like a broad music discussion, and especially kind of a discussion about the specifics of vinyl pressings and their jackets and things like that, check out my Dreadful Discs Instagram account, because that's where it's all going on.
Yeah, definitely go check it out. So the thing that kind of inspired this episode was that I'd initially bought tickets for me and my other half to see the Horrors performing Primary Colours at the Royal Albert Hall, where they play the whole album in its entirety. But she couldn't go, and so me and Dan went instead. And Dan hadn't actually heard this album before. So what was your first thoughts when you actually listened to the album for the first time and then at the gig?
When I listened to the album for the first time, I was really pleasantly surprised, because I think I'd really misconstrued who this band were and what they were about. When you actually said, I've got tickets for the Horrors, I thought, what the fuck is this guy on about? Are they that crappy, like, noughties horror pop band?
Naughty.
I think like the horror, I don't know, something about that name, the Horrors, and even now I think it doesn't quite mesh with the sound. I think I had like My Chemical Romance in mind or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not a fan, I have to say.
So I listened to the album like twice before the gig, and I was surprised at kind of the depth, the richness, and kind of like how like krautrocky and post-punky it was. I was expecting something like super poppy, really. Yeah.
And when we went to see them live, did that change, or did it?
Yeah, it was even better. It's cool just being in the Royal Albert Hall. Before we even get to the music, I think what people really want to know about is the seating. That was just a pleasure in itself, just to get a chance to sit down at a gig. I feel like I've earned it.
Yeah, our age, it's especially because we were really close to the front as well. They're really good seats.
They're very good. They pivot, don't they, and swivel. So it's actually
so
very
it makes you
comfortable.
facing the stage.
And before the band came on, actually, I mean, do we want to talk about the support act, Giant Swan?
Oh, that was her name. Well, yeah, that was like half an hour of just a noise.
Half an hour. It felt like it went on for hours.
Yeah,
it might be the worst thing I've ever seen, and I've seen a man die.
It's because you killed him.
It wasn't me. I just happened to be there at the time. Yeah, Giant Swan. I mean, the sound was giant, wasn't it? Although they weren't. They were like two kind of skinny little guys hopping around and pulling wires out and popping them back in again. And
they were definitely enjoying it more than anyone else.
I know. Royal Albert, he's going to be turning in his grave if he knows that was going on.
Yeah, he will be. Well, yeah. Luckily, we didn't have to put up with it for long. But yeah, when Horrors came out, I mean, they looked exactly the same as they feel like they've always have. They haven't seemed to age. And actually, sound-wise, if you remember, it wasn't the first few tracks weren't great. There's kind of acoustics, even though Royal Albert Hall was great for that kind of thing. Yeah, they were a little bit off. It didn't sound right until about halfway through the gig.
Yeah, it was a bit muddy, and I think that's often a pitfall of playing a venue like that. With it's so big, and it's like the Roundhouse in a way. I often find that it sounds a bit muddy, but it did settle down.
Yeah, I remember specifically like when they played "Who Can Say," that do 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 do, which is like the main hook. The organ just got completely lost in the noise of the wall of sound. Yeah,
shame.
But it was a bit of a shame. But as a performance, it was great. It was really cool, and especially to hear the whole album, in full. I really do enjoy that kind of thing because it means you get to listen, obviously, to like the smaller tracks which they don't normally play.
Yeah, because I imagine a lot of that is still in their set list.
Not as much. I mean, they've had like 3 or 4 albums now, haven't they, since then? So, yeah, you don't really hear much of the stuff from Primary Colours these days.
So a lot of it was a real dusting off and like a treat for the fans.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I enjoyed the, I did enjoy like the spectacle of the show as well. I think I find like the more gigs I go to, I stand there and I think, I know these songs like the back of my hand, and there's nothing much going on, but that was really cool. There's like, it's going to sound really, really sad, but I really like the lighting. There's a lot of cool stuff going on, like smoke and lasers and all this kind of thing, which sounds a bit naff, but especially like in the space of the Royal Albert Hall, because they were bouncing off of like all the back of the hall and the roof and
the architecture.
It really like added a lot of atmosphere to that music. It was very it was like epic and opulent.
Yeah, it was good. It was and when they came back to do their encore, they did Sheena as a Parasite and Counting Fives, which is from the first album, which is nice to hear. I haven't had those in a while. And then they did a lot more of their newer stuff, like Machine, which is off the latest album, which is a good one. Something to Remember Me By. And a couple of others. So they gave like almost another entire set's worth after they played the album. It was a really good gig. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. It was really cool. It was a really good, like introduction for me to the band. So thank you, and thank you to Mrs. Sam.
It's just me in a wig. She doesn't exist. Oh, she couldn't make it today. Sorry. That's why when you come over, it's like that scene in Mrs. Doubtfire. Put my head full of cream. Oh, hello, dear.
That's better than I thought you were going to say. It's like that scene from Psycho. Anyway, should we get off this track and get into the album?
Well, it's interesting because they got a lot of flack because they were NME cover stars before they'd even had an album out. And, people didn't, appreciate that so much. And I always remember, so I got into the Horrors I can't remember if it was the Counting Five single, but it was something it was whatever it was that came out just before the album Strange House came out, and I loved it because it was quite punky. It's very quite 60s garagey rock kind of sound, and and I thought, oh, this is great. This is kind of what I want to listen to at this moment in time, and it felt a little bit stylized, that big hair, lots of makeup, slightly goth looking. They definitely had a style, and they really pushed it in that direction. And for some people, it kind of overshadowed the music a bit because they just felt that it was all like pomp, really, and there wasn't really much substance to it. But when Strange House actually came out, I thought it was really good. I still think it's really good. I still listen to songs off it now, and they did play a couple of the tracks when we went to see them in the encore. So I think what makes this album quite different is that it's such a drastic change in sound from that album to this second album, and with it, there was that change of style as well. They started, they had haircuts and everything was a bit more, proper. But yeah, it was at the time, the big hair, and obviously, if, remember what I was kind of going for during that time was very, very similar. Skinny black jeans and big hair, all black. So yeah, that kind of fit that mold quite well.
I think you're always going to get that when you see a band that like quite suddenly changes up its style, especially its its visual aesthetic. You're always going to have those accusations thrown at the band, and it's going to a degree, overshadow some of the music for some people. Yeah.
There was also, I remember during the time I was working on the IT Crowd, and I was hanging out with Noel Fielding, who was part of Mighty Boosh, but he was also in IT Crowd. And it was series 3, I think I worked on. And during rehearsals, it didn't feel weird at the time, but looking back at it, it's actually quite strange. He was doodling pictures of the Horrors. So he was doodling like Faris, basically, the singer. And they were good doodles, and then doing like a kind of Horrors kind of logo in the similar style as, The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, that kind of like scratchy kind of looking font.
Yeah.
And anyway, I remember talking to him about the Horrors and stuff, and he was like, oh yeah, they're really, really cool. And he was hanging out with like Towers of London, if you remember them. And
God, yeah.
Yeah, so he was kind of part of that whole, like, it's the classic thing where like comedians want to be rock stars, right? So he was hanging around with people like that. And I don't know if you remember, but they actually starred in an episode of Mighty Boosh.
No.
Yeah, check it out because it's really cringe.
Okay.
And I think, if I remember rightly, like the storyline for that episode is that Noel's character, who I can't remember his name, is trying to get into like the skinny black jeans ever. They're almost like too small, and he's like, I can't do it. And they're like, you can do it, man, you can do it. But they're clearly like, obviously they're not actors, but they're kind of playing up to that kind of like droll, kind of like rock and roll Blur thing. It's really strange, but yeah.
So you saw that and you thought, yeah,
well, I thought
that parody, that's the look I want to adopt.
Yeah. Well, no, it was weird because it was like, well, that happened afterwards, but the TV show. But the things that were weird was, one, doodling a band when you're essentially a 35-year-old man. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit strange anyway.
Like on his sketchbook.
Yeah, it's just a bit weird. Heart. Like, why are you doodling like a band? Like, why are you doodling the band? But because obviously he likes that whole aesthetic. And for people that don't know as well, since the Mighty Boosh, the most famous thing he's done now is Great British Bake Off. Which is weird. He's like found a whole new audience, which is more in line with his age. That's horrible. I shouldn't say that. But yeah, and that was weird. And also, but I was very much like, oh, you like the Horrors? That's cool. Thinking, oh, something to like talk about or whatever. But it's like, if he's friends with them as well, that makes it even weirder. Do you know what I mean?
It's like when I spend all my time at work drawing pictures of you and Rich. And I've been called up on it, actually. I've been had to have a chat with HR.
Yeah.
It does take up a considerable amount of my time.
Dan, you've been through 10 reels of printer paper. We can't. The stationery order's gone through the roof.
I can't help it if I've got these great designs for like your appearance on stage. It's not my fault. you won't accept any of them.
I'm just picturing Richard's one is just like a circle with 2 eyes, just an egg. Because he's bald, for people that don't know who we're talking about. Sells bandmate, Rich Keeble.
It is funny to laugh about baldness.
Yeah, he'd find it funny, I'm sure, as well. Kind of. So just to give you, for people who don't know, the Horrors are a British band. Just give you a bit of background about them. So they were formed, funny enough, in Southend, which is near where I live now. I probably shouldn't say that in case anybody comes to try and find me. Just walking around Southend. Sam! They're formed in Southend, 2005, and the members are Faris Badwan, who's the singer, Joshua Howard, Tom Cohen, I think he changed his name to Tom First at some point, Reese Webb and Joe Spurgeon. They are the Horrors. And so essentially they basically formed by hanging out at what was called the Junk Club, which was beneath the Royal Hotel, where now there's a swanky bar. And funny enough, me and my wife sometimes go there to celebrate an anniversary or something like that. And they do like really nice cocktails and stuff. So it's really weird that like they formed in the basement of that building, essentially. And apparently, the first song they rehearsed was the Sonics' The Witch, which is like a 60s garage song, which when you hear, it's pretty obvious it's the Horrors, which I'll play you a bit now.
I didn't know they were fans of the Sonics, because obviously, like I said, from the gig and from listening to this album, I caught a lot of the kind of 80s, like I said, that shoegazy, dreamy, hazy stuff, but not a lot of that garage rock influence. I didn't pick up on that, but I love the Sonics.
Yeah, it's very much their first album sound was very much in that vein, but like with a modern edge, which is what made it so, appealing and interesting.
Yeah, and what's cool about the Sonics is that they were kind of one of the first, proto-punk and especially then proto-grunge bands. They were instrumental, it's often been said, in kind of forming the sort of groundwork for there to be that scene in Seattle.
Oh, really?
Decades later. Yeah. A lot of them said they're influenced by like their overall like attitude, but also like specifics of guitar tone and sound. Really influential, really cool, exciting band. So quite interested to know that the Horrors was so directly influenced by them.
Yeah, I mean, and that was kind of going on in this Southend scene at that time. That basically like listening to those type of bands and 60s type of bands, and that's why. When people were saying about picking them up on like skinny black jeans and all this certain look, they were like, that's what all them and their mates were doing. That was like the look that you had being part of this scene. And basically they just carried it across the country and it became more of a thing. But, but they're I think, is it Have Love Will Travel? Is that the Sonics as well?
Oh, I wouldn't like to go on record and say yes.
I can't remember now. I think it is. But yeah, they also covered Screaming Lord Sutch's Jack the Ripper, which people would know who are Horrors fans. Was also on Strange House, the Horrors' first album.
The Ripper, Jack the Ripper. There's a man walks the streets of London late at night. The Ripper.
So they were kind of playing around with that, and that was their first rehearsal, so it's quite interesting. So the album itself, it was nominated for the Mercury Music Award that year. It got Enemy's Album of the Year, 2009, and it got to number 25 in the UK charts, which is pretty good, to be honest, for the Horrors, especially during during that time. And yeah, so apparently, like, whilst they were recording it, it was very much like a kind of party atmosphere. And they walked in with about 40 songs ready to go, and they found 12 that kind of sat well together. But yeah, they'd kind of record during the week in Bath, I believe, and then come back to like party in London at the weekend. And yeah, it kind of got them in this weird like mindset, apparently. And then, yeah, so that they also what happened during the recording process is the bassist basically picked up the synths, and the organ player Reese picked up the bass, and he's been the bass player ever since, which is quite strange in itself. And just that one session, I believe they wrote Mirror's Edge and Do You Remember with Reese on his first day of bass, and they just kept going. It's really strange. I believe 3 Decades was the first single they kind of wrote from the album. But yeah, they played Universal some of those tracks, and they were then quickly dropped from the label, being told, yeah, so they didn't like it. And yeah, they were told that basically none of these are like hit singles. And they played a gig at the Astoria after they got dropped. I don't even think they were without a label for like 2 weeks, because a guy from XL Records basically signed them up and said, whatever you're doing, I don't care, like I don't need to listen to it, you can release it. So yeah, it's quite interesting that Universal dumped them
yeah
after hearing that album.
It's quite interesting as well that XL picked them up, because I imagine that was around the sort of time that they were starting to like diversify their roster.
Yeah.
I think, when did Radiohead start working with them? That was like a big, felt to me, that was when I noticed a sort of seismic shift away from just kind of like dance and stuff, and rave and all that. So they must have been one of the kind of like earliest kind of like more rock bands that they picked up.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, but I don't know what don't know what year Radiohead signed up with them, but I
think it was like around In Rainbows, which was what, 2008,
yeah,
2007,
2007. Maybe? Yeah, I think it probably was. Yeah, it's interesting.
The other link maybe might have been because they were working with Jeff Barrow.
Yeah, so Jeff Barrow was one of the producers. Yeah, tell us a little bit about, I know he's like part of Portishead, but yeah, what do you know about him?
Well, we saw him last year, didn't we? Because since Portishead, he's gone on to form Beak, who are a bit of a favourite of mine. I saw them quite a long time ago now, just like when I was really, really drunk at All Tomorrow's parties.
Yeah.
And I also had some sort of weird ear thing going on.
Internally,
so I walked into this room.
Externally. Sorry.
I walked into this room, and just like my whole head was spinning, and there was just this weird, great big, like droney ambient krautrocky noise. And that's essentially what Beak kind of do, but it's not quite as fuzzy as it was on that night. But yeah, he's got his own record label, and they're very much like stalwarts of the kind of like Bristol and Bath scene.
Right.
So I imagine that's what they were doing in Bath.
That makes sense. Yeah, that was. I enjoyed that gig by Beak. I wouldn't say it was. I don't remember any of the songs, if you know what I mean. There's nothing like specifically memorable, but yeah, that was quite. It's quite interesting.
Well, it was overshadowed, wasn't it, by one more memorable moment?
So as I'm waiting for Dan outside, where was it? I can't remember where it was now. Was it Kentish Town Forum?
Yeah.
And I'm waiting outside the venue, and for people who don't know, it's on a main road. So yeah, so I'm leaning up against this metal fence, and this guy comes up and goes, "Oh, who's playing? Who's playing tonight?" And I was like, "Oh, the OCs." And he's like, "I don't know who they are." And I was like, "Oh yeah, well, you might like them." Having a conversation with him, whatever. And he starts telling me about how he's been brought up around the corner and all this. And basically I started getting that vibe that I was like, oh, he's hitting on me. I see. And and weren't you you could kind of see it happening from down the road or something?
Yeah, as I was approaching the venue, I was like, oh, who's that he's talking to? The weirdest looking guy that you could like imagine. It's like, of course he's talking to him.
But what's great as well is he's on the main road. He's just pulled up. You know what I mean? It's not like it's not as if he's on the pavement or anything. He's just pulled up to the side of the main road just to keep chatting to me. And even when you came over, he was still like talking. He still kind of wanted to keep us.
Keep you, not me. He only had eyes for you. He had no concern for the traffic, for his own physical welfare. He was on a one-track mission.
He really was.
Yeah.
But he kept telling me. He kept telling me where he lives.
Did you ever see him again?
No, thank God. Apart from when I went to his house later that night. No, but it was really strange. It really didn't click with me until about halfway through, and I could see you calling, and I was just thinking, oh, it's too rude to answer the phone.
Oh yeah, I was trying to help you out. I was like, I'll call him so he's got an excuse to wander off and answer the phone.
It's just that posh, not posh, but it's like that British way of being like, oh, I don't want to appear rude, do I?
I did notice that as he rode off as well, he had removed his saddle.
Oh God.
Could enjoy the journey home.
He had one of those, when Mr. Garrison in South Park has that bike, and it's like it's like a dildo up his arse, and he controls it with his mouth. Whatever it is, just picturing him riding away in one of those. He was also like 60 years old or something. I forget to mention this. He's really old. And also I kept saying about, my wife and kids and all this stuff. I didn't care. Could not give a shit. Oh God, it was horrible. But yeah, that was quite funny. That was.
Yeah. And then to be fair, then I turned up and started talking to you about my bins. So you're probably thinking, "Fucking hell, bring him back."
Bring him back. I might be interested. I don't know yet. I'll try anything. Yeah. Oh man. So
Jeff Barrow.
Sorry, come.
Oh yeah, I was going to say I was interested to know this whole sound and you say them swapping instruments. Was that all part of? Did they want to develop that sound, so they worked with Jeff Barrow, or did they happen to start working with him and he was I'm going to change your sound?
Well, apparently he. I can't remember how they initially hooked up with him. I think they just chose him. I might be making that up, but he was very much. They were talking about producing this certain sound and doing this, that, and the other, and he was very much no. You want to keep it to how you've done your demos. Don't overthink it. He was very much like this is the sound that you want to recreate the rest of the album, and that's what they did. So yeah, he was very. So yeah, when there's that thing of a lot of people criticize the Horrors by saying that Jeff Barrow constructed that sound, and I believe he's quite vocal in saying that he didn't. If anything, he was trying to get them back to the sound that they had already established in the demos for the album, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the other guy who's listed on Discogs, where I'm looking at the moment, as a producer is Chris Cunningham.
Yeah, so Chris Cunningham, if people don't know, is a music video director. And yeah, he's probably best known for the Aphex Twin video Window Licker, which is probably one of my favourite music videos. It's also one of my favourite songs, actually, really, of all time. I love that song. And yeah, but he's done tons more than that. He's done lots of Bjork and whatever.
Come to Daddy.
Yeah, Come to Daddy as well. Yeah, the Aphex Twin music video song.
Bloody hell.
Yeah, so
that video,
Chris, yeah, that's great. I love that video. I might watch it again actually after this. I'll put a lot of these links that we talk about in the show notes as well. So you guys can click through and watch it if you need to. But yeah, I believe he did a couple of songs off the album and helped produce them. But yeah, he actually came out of a 6-year hiatus. How'd you say it? It's hiatus, right?
Hiatus.
It's one of those words that I never really say, but I always read a lot. And he came out of this 6-year gap, let's say, to do the Horrors music video Sheena is a Parasite, which has Samantha Morton in it, funny enough, from the first album. So obviously they'd made a bit of an impression on each other. And yeah, so Chris Cunningham actually did produce a couple of the tracks. And also it was mixed by a guy called Craig Silvey, who'd done a lot of mixing for British bands like The Coral, Kasabian. He actually did Eagles as well. He's a band that do you like them as well? Have we spoken about them? Yeah,
I thought they were really cool when they came out.
They were, yeah. That first album was great. Second album, not so much, in my opinion. So that was who made the album essentially. And it was recorded in Bath in 2008. And yeah, so I think for fans of the Horrors, it was actually a surprise. You know, people weren't really expecting them to go in this direction. You know, they're usually bold and brash, but here they're doing something that's, you know, completely different. It also showed that they weren't just hype, which is a lot of shtick they got at the time, and, you know, All Style No Substance that we said before. But that, you know, people liked Strange House. They had some punky songs. No one really thought it would last. You know, it wasn't like a hit after hit kind of album. And yet, yeah, there was like, before the album came out, a lot of the music industry buzz that was going around was like, you know, man, they've really knocked it out of the park with this album. It's amazing. You know, and you think about other albums that were coming out that year. The XX had just released their first album, which I loved. Wild Beasts released Two Dancers, which is probably one of my favourite albums of all time. Yeah's released Zero, for what that's worth. Dizzy Rascal had just released Bonkers, which remained on TV and every advert or whatever for years to come, in England anyway.
Quite rightly.
Yeah, exactly. LaRue, who is known as the daughter off that one off the bill, she and was like ginger and sang really high and had a side parting. She came and went for the Kill, if you remember that. Everyone was like, oh, just a one-hit wonder. She was like, I'm not a one-hit wonder. And she was a one-hit wonder. What a surprise. So that was kind of going on. So there was it was a weird time where it's like, you know, having great songs, not that LaRue's an example of a great song, but it was just a reminder of the time, really. But you know, having like decent albums was starting to get a bit more rare, I think, anyway, in terms of like a mainstream NME style, you know, list of albums or whatever.
Yeah, that list of bands that you just rattled off, I was kind of aware of them at the time, but actually that whole thing seems to have completely passed me by. I can't for the life of me remember what I was listening to in 2009. I'm actually just trawling through my Facebook account now to even see what the hell I was doing in 2009. I seem to skip from 2008 to 2010, so it's a bit of a lost year for me.
Well, you weren't listening to music.
I was probably just, it's sealed in a vacuum somewhere, experiencing absolutely little as possible, just in a sort of void.
Yeah. Well, I think what was also like what kind of got people starting to think about Horrors differently is that they clearly like love their music, and that might not have come through so much on the first album. But yeah, they wear some of their influences like quite clearly on their sleeve. And one of the things when you read the interviews with them at the time is that there's not a sense of like essentially copying a sound. It feels more like a natural evolution, that these guys are understanding more like what's behind the music rather than kind of parodying a certain type of sound. Because I think people were saying, oh, it's just like, it sounds like can or whatever, and or new, NEU with an apostrophe mark. Especially, I think they've got a song called Hallo Gallo, which people said, oh, it's just Hallo Gallo, which I'll play a couple of those bits now. yeah, they actually weren't even aware of those guys, which, you know, in a way is quite refreshing, I guess, so because they had felt like they had naturally found a sound which might not be new to the music industry or whatever, but it was new to them, and that was kind of what was getting them excited, which I think kind of, you know, comes through. And during the time, they were also reading the book Rip It Up and Start Again, which is like a post-punk study by Simon Reynolds. It's being passed around the band and was apparently highly influential to when they were making the album.
Good book, that.
Yeah, I haven't read it. Have you read it?
Got a copy here, yeah. It's great.
Yeah.
Bit of a tour de force of the whole post-punk scene, all the big bands.
Right, I have to read it because it apparently made quite the impression on these guys. The sleeve, if you haven't seen the sleeve, it's basically a blurry shot of the band. It's quite simple, and it's one of those things where on the CD case, the title of the Horrors, Primary Colours, whatever, is actually a sticker on the front of the jewel case, rather than on the actual artwork as such.
I always wonder about that.
It's weird, isn't it? Like, what happens with that? Like, is that part of the artwork? Is it not?
Exactly. I think it's like born out of the old kind of jackets from the 70s, especially like, you know, a lot of prog, where the artists were taking back more control.
Right.
And they could say, basically, we want like an artistic statement, and we don't want any kind of like advertising, so we don't want our name on it or anything. We just want this like bold image, and really respect the designer. And it feels like at some point, you know, record companies they made a concession to bands like the Horrors by saying, look, we need your name on it, but we'll let you keep the artwork, but we're going to slap a big fat sticker on it.
Yeah. It's it's weird. The actual album cover itself is one of those classic things that, you know, doesn't say anything. You know, it's just an image, and the fact that it's blurry, you can't make anyone out or who's in the band or whether what they look like. Is quite interesting, but I think it also gives that it's also quite representative of the sound of it being like distorted and fuzzy and all this stuff.
That's it. If you had the name of the band or the title as part of the actual artwork, it would really undermine, I think, the effect that they're going for. Which is why you've probably got this compromise then, because, you know, if you're a marketing guy at XL Records, you think, oh my fucking Christ, I've got to get the Horrors on it somewhere.
Yeah. It's an obvious statement to how they've ditched the style, and they don't want to be seen for the style, but seen more for the music. And apparently it was a Polaroid that was taken by accident during a photography session, and I think it kind of works really nicely. And whilst they were like, you know, when they were playing live, when they first played the album or songs off the album live, apparently it didn't. It went down well, but the band were like not that excited by it because they just felt like it's a bunch of like industry peeps standing there with their arms folded, which, you know, is quite understandable. And they actually, you know, they kind of stopped playing songs from Strange House. To this day, really, they might play it in an encore, like when we saw them. But because it doesn't fit their new sound, they kind of started slowly distancing themselves from those tracks. And it was actually, they were kind of keeping up with technology a little bit by this point as well, because they felt that C Within a C was actually the highlight for them of the whole album, and they actually released that first. And it was on as a music video, but also it's a digital download on their website. So that was kind of like the first release as such, and a lot of people, you know, went crazy just for that song, and it's a great song as well. And the actual video of it was directed by the Jesus and Mary Chain bassist, funny enough.
Douglas Hart. That's your man that you're talking about there.
You've won. Yes, Douglas Hart. And it's a really good video as well. I'll put a link in the show notes, and you guys should check it out. So let's go into the actual album. So the first track of the album is called Mirror's Image. So let's play a bit of that now. So yeah, the song begins with these textures. It reminds me a bit of the Lost in Translation soundtrack, actually, which is Kevin Shields, who was part of My Bloody Valentine anyway, which is going to be a band that I'll kind of bring up quite often during the course of this. And they use those gongs, but they've used it as like a beat, and you can hear them turning the volume up and down, and so they're just immediately creating this kind of soundscape. And then you'll hear slowly what sounds like a guitar effect that's looped comes in alongside the bass, and this is kind of what they played around with a lot during the recording of this album, is guitar effects, using effect pedals and trying to get different sounds and stuff like that out. And so they start creating the melody, and it's just a really great intro to the whole album. They have that, it's kind of a good summation of the entirety of how they've put together the album and its different parts just through this one song. So they have the bass line that comes in as the first actual melody you're hearing, that do 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 do. Really strong, and it really hooks you in, and that's kind of a running theme throughout all these songs, is that really strong, melodic, catchy bass lines that the kind of guitars and everything else swirls around. What did you think the first time you heard this song, like the very first track of the album?
I thought it sounded a lot like our band, and I thought this is going to be very revealing.
You mean I've forgotten the Last Great Depression?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that tune that we often perform at the top of our show.
Yes,
and opened our first EP.
That's true. I'll put a link to that in the show notes so people can judge for themselves whether it was it's copyright infringement there. Yeah.
I was like, basically, as this album continues, am I just going to see the whole of our band's catalogue unfurl before my very ears?
Yeah. That's not far off, to be honest.
But yeah, I agree with everything you just kind of said, and it's got that classic kind of building up. It's a really nice way just to sort of ease the listener's ears into an album where there's going to be, you can anticipate there's going to be a lot of layering of really interesting sounds and textures, and it just kind of gets you pumped for what's to come. Yeah, really good opener.
It's very good at creating this world. It's one of those albums which, if you turned all the lights off and stuck it on, you're in. Like, it really, really sucks you in quite quickly. And just the way it deals, like every aspect of it. So, like in terms of the drums here, it's got starts off with that very subtle kick that goes on. It sounds like it might be like an 808 or something similar when you listen to it. But then it starts slowly merging with like an actual kick from a sound kit, and they kind of play with that a little bit as well, of like these electronic sounds mixing with analog sounds, essentially like real sounds, and then that snare roll, and that snare roll comes in, and alongside it that sweeping guitar. I mean, they make full use of like the stereo sound, as it were, like all these things, like feels like waves and like sea within a sea, essentially, and funnily enough, like waves and water and the sea is like a common motif throughout the album in terms of like lyrically as well, and literally you're seeing it here in a sonic way, because you just feel like you're immersed in this, like the waves of guitars and sounds that are kind of coming at you. And it's kind of one of the key sounds from the album, really, is that shoegazy guitar. Again, it's in the style of My Bloody Valentine, which, for people who don't know, it's usually like a mix of distortion, obviously, delay and reverb pedals that kind of give it this weird dynamic. I mean, I've got like and what I use for Last Great Depression, which we talked about, I've got this Memory Man pedal, which has like a reverse delay, and you can play with the feedback sound that you get off it, which gives you this really cool sweeping guitar effect that kind of, feeds back on itself and then feeds itself again and kind of encapsulates that sound, and it's really interesting. So from a guitar effect, because I quite like my guitar effects, even though you probably wouldn't think it, seeing as it's just usually a combination of distortion pedals in my my music, but I do quite like it, and when you can create different sounds like this, it's really interesting. The
other sound I picked up on in this track was a bit of the Manchester sound, I thought.
Yeah.
I don't know if you got that, but I thought New Order, even a bit of the Stone Roses, not a band that I personally particularly like, but definitely that kind of like hazy wash, and I could kind of imagine him sort of swaying around a bit like Ian Brown, which wasn't a particularly appealing image, but
I'd probably think it's more Stone Roses than New Order. Actually, you're right. Like it has a certain warmth to it as well that which I think of like Stone Roses as having in a weird way. The guitarist guy, whose name has now just completely. I think Tom Cohen might be the guitarist, and someone can pick me up on that later if they want to. I believe he's a big fan of pedals and like creating new sounds and seeing what you can get from making your own pedals and all this stuff. The part of the whole sound of what they're doing with the guitar as well is just through a technical standpoint is using like the whammy bar, and My Bloody Valentine again do this quite a lot, which makes so obviously your guitar is in tune. When you use a whammy bar, you're slightly bending the tuning of the guitar so that it's slightly off. So that's why you hear that like of the like guitar when that comes in. That's kind of using a whammy bar and slightly putting the sound off, so it's not quite in tune, which gives it that sense of unease. And that's, again, they do that quite a lot through this album. It gives that feeling of something's not quite right, and it puts you, you're on your seat, at the edge of your seat a little bit more than when you would do. And when it's done, sometimes it can sound awful, but when it's done right, it really does have this incredible effect, and it really works for something here.
It can be abused.
Yeah.
Let's wait and see how it crops up throughout the rest of the album, because it can become a crutch as well for a lot of bands, can't it? When you're trying to get that whole sound.
Yeah.
Whammy abuse.
Yeah, exactly. And there does become a bit of that. But when you're kind of creating like this kind of more of a soundscape than an actual like melody with your guitar, you kind of get a bit more freedom with it. And yeah, from a kind of another technical standpoint, they're doing a lot with compression here. You hear the sound duck every now and then to give it part of the effect, and also makes it sound also a bit wavy again, I guess.
Did you say we'll hear a duck throughout?
Yeah, duck. The sound ducks.
The sound of a duck.
You might hear every now and then. No.
What the hell were they doing in that studio in Bath?
No, so for people that don't know, so I should explain, when it's like when you're like side chaining or compressing something, which essentially means you're turning something down to create more space for the other sounds that are on that frequency to fill. So a lot of people do this. A lot of dance music does this with like kicks. So like my Legacy stuff, there's a lot of side chain in the drums, which basically means that everything else by milliseconds gets turned down, so the drum kicks in on that beat and takes up that entire kind of sonic space, as it were, Sonic the Hedgehog space. And yeah, so you can kind of hear how they're playing around with that a little bit. And yeah, it just gives it this quite dynamic sound without it kind of taking up too much space in the frequency of the human ear, if that makes sense.
That sounds boring. I'd rather hear the duck.
Yeah. And basically, when the sound gets turned down fully, a little duck eats it, keeps it out, and it comes back.
That's good. We're back on my level now. if we can keep the technical discussion to a minimum.
Yeah.
And more wildfowl, please.
Well, yeah, people might not like ducks. I don't know.
You've got to cater to all audiences.
Yeah, the ducktails. Yeah, so there's the keyboard here, the synths that they use. It loops really nicely. It taps the first kind of thing taps into the top of the EQ, as it were. So it's got like a much more high end sound. It feels really full, and it's essentially kind of mirroring the sound that came in alongside the bass earlier, and they complement each other quite nicely. The drums have this like slight reverb, and they're kind of sitting in the same space as the vocals, which is quite reverby as well. And just to talk about Faris's voice for a sec, what did you think when Faris first starts singing?
I felt it was something I'd heard before. Which meant it was sort of familiar to me. It felt like a very recognisable sound. I honestly thought this is a song from the 80s that I've heard several times before, probably whilst drunk at a student nightclub or something. Again, which sort of harks back to me feeling like, yeah, this is that kind of like 80s dreamy or early 90s even Manchester shoegazy sound. It obviously fit the music. I don't know though if other people feel that there's something a bit more like unique to his voice, but for me it was just sort of it's there, it's an instrument in the mix, sort of doing what it needs to be doing alongside all those other myriad sounds and textures.
Yeah, I mean with this album, it's a lot less punky singing, but you can still tell it's the same kind of singing. It's I like to kind of call it's like a frenzied talk singing, which is what he does. And I think it does sound, it's not new, but it does sound quite unique. But it's also because he really gives it like 110%. There's some like gusto behind it, which is that kind of 80s confidence, right? Where it's like, you're all in.
There's a bit of a swagger. It's a croon with a swagger. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. It's kind of a little bit defiant. I mean, some people said it's a bit too Ian Curtis. Kind of. I kind of see it. I wouldn't say it's, it's more like an inspiration of rather than a copy of, maybe. But it feels very dramatic. It's like, and he puts, and what I really like, and what is quite 80s, he puts unique emphasis on different words, like, when he goes, walk on into that kind of like really bravado, almost kind of aspect of it. It feels quite cool. It feels like he's kind of rallying you into the song. And it's perfect for the opening track, I think. It really kind of reflects the album as a whole.
Yeah, he's also got a bit of a defeated sound in there as well as that swagger. Which again, maybe that's where people get the Ian Curtis thing from.
Yeah, true, yeah. So at about the 2-minute 18 mark, the guitar kind of drifts off, leaving the bass slowly build up, and the electro kind of part, and this clean feeling is a slight respite. You're very much aware that the distorted guitars aren't there, and this electric loop is running and running. It just keeps you in that same headspace, but also makes you feel slightly uncomfortable because now you've kind of got used to that guitar sound and you want it to come back. You almost miss it, which is really strange. And then when it does come back, it kind of really washes over you again. You're enveloped in this like grit and dirt. And it's so heavily distorted now that it's pretty much crackling. It's like everything else is so clean, and the guitar is just so dirty. You feel like it feels like it's making the song better by trying to ruin it. And that kind of speaks throughout the whole album. And that's the reason why this first track is, I'm kind of taking so long with it. It's just because it's so reflective of, what's about to happen, what the rest of the album's going to sound like. And really, when you think about it, it's like a structured song. It's actually quite short. It feels longer, but the actual basis of the song itself is only really a couple of minutes. It's, the same bits each time, well, like any song, but, it's actually like a 2-minute song in like a 4 or 5 minute soundscape. There's a second build up. The crescendo now has a very high guitar picking sound for me, which is actually probably one of my favourite parts of the album. Walk on into the night. it's a little bit Interpol. Interpol do it quite a lot. But there's usually more staccato, and that means like staccato is essentially when you're playing quickly, like dig 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 dig. So yeah, it's not quite as Interpol do quite heavy staccato, so it's not quite as much as that. But there's just so much fuzz on it. It sounds great. It's merging into another build-up, this time with the sweeping guitar, and then slowly all the elements start stopping, and it just leaves that electronic sound just to kind of see us out. And just musically, that first track is great.
It's very dramatic and filmic.
Yeah,
it's very visual. You can imagine that being a soundtrack to the opening of a film, and there's like some epic planes or something that you're scanning over with some nice mist and fog rising up.
Yeah. So just to talk about the lyrics a little bit as well. Weirdly, I kind of had something in my head when I came into this of like what he's kind of singing about a little bit, and a lot of these are about love, unrequited love or forlorn kind of love. But then just with this song in particular, and I was thinking about it, I kind of turned it on its head a little bit, and then it became a bit more depressing in a weird way. A lot of the songs are like about, maybe like an ex that you're still crazy about, which is what I felt like this song at first, was kind of about. Like whatever that's happened has left you in a state of this like crippling shyness, and you're trying your best to just walk on into the night and forget about her. And it's quite this vivid imagery, like about a fleeting moment that just from one look has sent you into this kind of, mania. But then I was thinking, like, why is it called Mirror's Image? And then, thinking about the title, then wondered if this was actually about a woman noticing her own reflection, someone who perhaps hates the way they look. And now when I listen to it from that angle, it's exponentially more sadder and full of melancholy. So it's the lyrics, just to kind of go over them quickly, it goes, is it her way? Is it the way she looks at you, seeing her face as you walk through the crowded avenue that sets you afire, remembering all you left behind? Don't fall back in line. Better you let her memory die. Draw strength. Walk on into the night. Better you try to pass her by. Walk on into the night. Is it too late? Or are you forever in this state of crippling shyness whenever you see her walking by? So yeah, at first I thought that was like about an ex. But then, if you think about it, about someone that's looking at their own reflection, it's much darker. I don't know if that's what it's going for.
It's bloody sad. Sad.
It's quite horrible. The idea you catch this glimpse of yourself and you just hate yourself that much that it's like, it's just, it's horrible. It always, like that whole like walk on into the night, something, I remember someone describing Tears for Fears, who we both love, as that the reason why it's so powerful is their songs are like upbeat, hopeful, determined, but yet full to the brim of basically sadness, failure, depression, melancholy. And this it kind of taps into that a little bit of like this like triumphant kind of song of like, walk on into the night, whatever, when it's actually the saddest thing, the saddest thing in the world.
That's a good comparison, actually. I hadn't thought of that before, but because obviously Tears for Fears, big sounds, big production, but essentially, they started that band and it was all born out of like their sort of like sad desperation to get some of their really bitter feelings down on tape. Yeah,
they made it very clear that it was, a Freudian analytical look at their like childhood and their life. Hence why The Hurting is a little child basically crying at the front. Not to kind of go into that, but so this is, I think it's a great choice for an opener. And then the next song is 3 Decades. So this was essentially the first song that was actually recorded for the album, and it kind of dictates what else would come. Let's just give it a listen a little bit. So, what do you think about this song, Dan?
Yeah, I really like this. Totally kicking into like a new gear now. So we hit track 2. Definitely sounds a bit more garagey, you know, when you were talking about the Sonics back then.
Yeah.
That's just like a really nasty start as well. Like the first 10 seconds, that beat coming in, quite, you know, like post-punk beat. It's not quite straight. And some of those sounds just, they're quite aggressive. They sound a bit dirty and nasty. And then you get this kind of like quite speedy kind of song, as opposed to like the first track, which is all quite, you know, building quietly and meditatively.
Yeah. It's weird that you say you like the first 10 seconds, because every time this song comes up, it's the initial 10 seconds always puts me off listening to it. And I have to remind myself that that's not the song, if you know what I mean. Like, that's not the whole song, because it just feels like really, it has this like xylophonic, like underwater kind of sound, and the guitar's really screechy and it sounds like really off, but then it's almost as if like the drums are trying to break through, and then suddenly, you know, it does that roll, and it's like and we're in that groove. And
I really like all that. It sounds like a rusty hinge or like a door falling off a car.
Yeah,
it's quite jarring, you know, after the first song. Straight in there now, bam.
And then in, and it also like, so again we've got the kind of guitars like waving slightly out of tune, and almost like a string section in an orchestra, and then so then it's got that organ sound, which is quite a signature sound from the first album that kind of carries through here and isn't really done too much throughout the rest of the album, but it's very quite dominant here. And it does indeed sound quite scary, hence why, you know, this organ sound became such a signature kind of thing for a band called The Horrors.
It's quite an atonal sound, that is, and it's definitely a standout.
Yeah, something gothic about it, and it's very catchy here actually. Like, and then once after the verses, there's this swell, like again, like a wave, like lifting you up. And vocal wise, it has this like spooky reverse delay going on, which means you can slowly like start hearing it before you even start singing. It's quite a catchy chorus, but yeah, again, like Faris is completely committing here. He's got a really catchy vocal melody that has a nice flow to it and quite a satisfying ending. So yeah, we essentially have, it's quite a simple song. We essentially have the intro again. It's a bit more of a build up, then we're into the chorus, and that's basically it. That's kind of the whole song. I'd say generally it's got a couple of nice sounds to it, but it's probably one of the more, personally, I think it's one of the more forgettable tracks off the album. It's quite simple. It has a bit of catchiness to it, but there's nothing that really resonates or that sticks in the brain for too long. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, it seems to me like, it's kind of like a change of gear kind of track after the opener. Just to give us, you know, I'm just looking, it's the shortest song on the album.
Right.
Just to kind of segue into Who Can Say.
Yeah. Which we'll get into. I'm just going to, just the lyrics here, just to talk about it a little bit. It sounds like, 3 decades in Canada, and now you plan to leave your home and lead a life more valiant. So the whole thing sounds like someone venturing off to a new life. It's full of like motivational language. Don't let fear dictate your life. Forget your regrets, all this stuff. But at the same time, the idea of a new life is imagined as like as a woman almost. It's personified. It's almost sexualized in a way. I mean, perhaps it's literally about someone losing their virginity. Like this is the new adventure they've gone on. But it sounds more like it's about someone being brave and leaving their old life behind for pastures new. So it's okay lyrically, there's nothing there that really particularly, hits home or like makes you feel anything really. I would say it's not one of the better written tracks off the album, but it's okay. As you said, it kind of feels like it's more, you've had the kind of intro, the kind of headspace thing, and now they're kind of gearing you up, doing something that's a bit faster that kind of ups the pace a little bit.
Yeah, it's a fun little track.
Yeah. So the next track is Who Can Say? Let's listen to a little bit of that now. So right from the off, it begins with this incredibly deep, dirty, kind of grungy guitar sound. Drums punctuating it. It's almost slightly like a bit tribal almost, but it's counteracting the staccato effect of the guitar that they're doing here. And then when that organ kind of chimes in, it sounds like it's in a deserted dance hall, which is exactly what the music video is. Essentially, it's them like crooning in a ballroom, basically. And yeah, it's very catchy. What's your first, out of the gate reaction?
I thought this one sounded like it was probably the single. It seems quite conventional to me. The melody's quite straightforward, and it seems that I think a lot of the appeal of this is in the sound and all those kind of moving parts that are going on around it. But if you were to strip it back, I think it's quite a basic track. Which is why then I'd say that could be a single, because it's probably quite easy to digest. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's it was very much the kind of hit single, I think, off the album. It sounds like something you'd almost hear at like Southend Pier. Do you know what I mean? Like you could almost hear it drifting from like a scary abandoned arcade or something.
It has got a kind of kaleidoscopic whirl about it, but it's also like there's something like queasy about it.
Yeah. And you're right, yes. Sound-wise, there's a lot less kind of going on here. It's a lot like clearer. The guitar, it doesn't have much low frequency to it. Instead, it's kind of bouncing in the middle to higher range, which is a bit more like normal for, guitar-based music. Ferris's vocals, they've slightly distorted them, so it sounds a bit like a slight croon, or as if it's coming out of like a vinyl record or like an old style stereo. So they've kind of given it that, effect almost of like, that old, as I said, like that old kind of 40s or 50s kind of crooning or whatever. And then on the second verse, they've got the guitar that comes back in, which kind of drives that dirtiness again, like making sure you haven't forgot about it. And the snare, it's driving us fast towards the bridge each time. And then it kind of cuts out in the middle with this bit, which is just Ferris talking to us about his experience, like we're a friend, or he's reading a poem, or perhaps he's relaying his sadness in a dying breath. But the actual lyrics in this bit are from a band called Jay and the Americans, a track they did called She Cried. And it was covered by a few people, including the Shangri-Las, Aerosmith, actually, funny enough. But so the bit that's this bit.
And when I told her I didn't love her anymore, she cried. And when I told her her kisses were not like before, she cried. And when I told her I didn't love her anymore, she cried. And when I told her her kisses were not.
So yeah, it's a little bit different. But I didn't realise until just looking into this that that's actually what it was from that song.
And beyond that song, I mean, it's a total pastiche of kind of early 60s pop, especially like girl band pop. I mean, that drum beat, that is Be My Baby. And then those lyrics he's singing, it's all kind of like a bit tongue-in-cheek and knowing about a relationship. He's singing to a girl. It's quite cool.
So and then towards the end of the song, we've got the organ that comes back in. It's at a higher scale now, like it's crying out a little bit more here. And then you've got the distinctive sweeping guitar sound comes back. It's kind of like, it feels like they're doing it with a bottleneck slide guitar. And it now sounds almost like celebratory, like it's still got a sadness to it still, but sounds a bit more, like a celebration. And then, Faris kind of just sings Get Away over and over and over again at the end, like he's done
like
with
Lenny
it.
Kravitz.
Exactly, yeah. Imagine. Like he's finished. He's finished with it. Is he talking to us or is he talking to her?
Who can say?
Who can say? Not me. Even though I just did. And the lyrics are pretty self-explanatory. He's trying to break up with someone, and he's like, "Look, it's better off if we weren't together." But again, it's kind of, he's trying to do it in like a rip the plaster off kind of way. Like, you're better without me. Better off without me. And another guy will treat you better. I just want to end it. So he's like trying to be nice by being mean, basically, like just pure rejection. The whole getaway thing, whether it's for her sake or not, he just doesn't want it to continue. So it's quite a sad song that's about heartbreak, but from what starts as someone trying to be quite nice about it, it seems to actually get exasperated by it by the end. So I don't know how nice it actually is. But yeah, for me, I loved this song. I thought it was great. It's really, it's just really unique, for me anyway. But yeah, what are your thoughts on it?
I think it's cool that I've just kind of like drawn this little parallel from what we've been speaking about, some of this 60s stuff, and like I said, Be My Baby, just to think about how influenced they might have been by Phil Spector. Because it seems to emulate that sound, and more broadly I'm thinking there's all that cacophony of sound, and it really makes me think of the wall of sound techniques and everything. And I think the more I listen to this and the deeper we go in, the more I'm hearing it's not just bits of shoegaze and krautrock. Actually, there's a grounding in a lot of classic kind of rock and roll.
Yeah, it definitely has that to it. So yeah, we kind of move on now to like, Do You Remember? Let's have a little listen to that. So yeah, it's funny you talk about Stone Roses, because this does really have like a 90s Stone Roses sound to it. And even though, again, this still has that kind of guitar sound that they've had throughout the album, it's a little more clearer here. There's more picking and melody being played than before, rather than a bit more of a soundscape. It's a bit less catchy, and but I don't know. What do you think?
I like that.
Yeah,
I like that. It's got a bit of a lurch to it. It's a bit slower. He sounds a lot more strained and pained. Essentially, I like human despair, and when that comes through in music, I'm happy.
Yeah. I think technically it's not one of the better songs on the track. It's the guitar hook, I think, is kind of overdone a little bit by the end of the song. That just gets a little tiresome. It just always like returns back to it, and after a while you're a bit like, okay, fine. Chorus as well isn't that great. It's not quite as powerful as the other ones, and they have a silent verse and they build up, and then it's a bit disappointing because it doesn't really go anywhere else. It goes back to that guitar hook, which I'm already quite bored of really by that point. He does sound a little bit more pained. There's some points where I think he maybe sounds a bit more unenthusiastic maybe. But yeah, there's some interesting drum fills, but for me, this is not one of the stronger tracks on the album, and it just kind of ends as well. It's not a bad track or anything, but I would say it's one of the ones where if push came to shove, I'd probably skip it if I was if it's time dependent.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think? Is it one of your faves?
I don't know if I'd say that, but I certainly, I like this because it's a slightly more flat, defeated sound. Again, I think it's just like another facet of what's on this album. It sounds quite like post-punk to me, but without the kind of like the danceability factor.
Yeah. Lyrically, it's a bit more interesting for me because it's it sounds as if it's about someone asking another person to wait, and they're reminding them of their past relationship, on the surface, it kind of makes it sound like it's like a long distance love. They talk about he talks about a sea being in between them, and what does a sea represent? We all learnt this at 14 or whatever in English classes. Yeah. It's death is the answer. So is it actually about someone seeing off their loved one? Is it about them maybe clinging on to their memories of one another that he will soon reach her in death? And perhaps she's not quite dead. Perhaps she's like laying there dying or something like that. And if and he says, if you don't remember now, you will soon. It's almost a slight threat, but instead it could be deemed that that death would have released her from the clutches of a human memory. And it's quite a funny line to kind of end the whole song on, but. Yeah, it's a little bit more intriguing lyrically, I think, than the actual music side of it.
Yeah, that bloody sea. There should be more anti-sea songs. You don't hear many of them, do you? But they're quite right. I don't know why they bother with it.
Yeah,
just get rid of it.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes, because I live by the sea, I sometimes look out and just think, death.
I wish that whole ruddy lot of water would evaporate.
Yeah, well, it kind of does, because the tide goes in and out.
Is that how it works? I don't really understand.
Yeah, well, it's not evaporation. It's not all going into not disappearing into the air.
Are you sure? I thought, and then it just sort of comes up through the cracks overnight.
Comes up through the cracks like lava.
Yeah.
Born again.
That's how it all works, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, not quite. And then, next track is New Ice Age. Let's have a listen. So, what was your first thoughts when you heard this song?
I thought, that's really vicious. I like it. It feels like, okay, this is getting serious now, this album. We've got something just really menacing, really dramatic, nice bit of bite and edge to it. He sounds pissed off. It's really quite punky when those vocals come in. Yeah, I like this one a lot. Yeah, weirdly, it's one of my favourite ones. I just love guitar riffs that don't actually sound quite right. Notes that feel like they don't actually belong together, and it can really come across as quite evil actually as a result. Like the one I think of, from what we do is you never started nothing. It's quite similar in that, and it's just three notes, but they don't sound like they belong together, so it makes it sound really quite horrible in a weird way. And the opening to the song is exactly like that. It's got a great build up at the beginning, and it's making you wonder where's this going? What's going to happen? Guitar riff keeps getting built upon, and it now sounds even
worse / better, depending how you're looking at it. Like it's getting more weird, a bit more frantic, and there's this weird vibrato that's been added, which makes it comes across even more strange. And then also in the background, there's this like strange drone that, you're not quite aware of, some that, on the surface. It also adds to this like unease that's kind of building up. And then you've got the snare roll kind of brings in the beat, but it doesn't break. You know what I mean? Like the snare roll comes in, it's not breaking anything. You're still left with this uneasy guitar sound, which makes you feel, even more uneasy, because you feel like you've built up for it to like reach some kind of crescendo. And it's not. It's actually still going, even though the drums have come in now. Yeah,
it gets quite claustrophobic, this track.
Yeah, it's really great. It's clever as well the way they do it. But yeah, there's more effects now. A lot of effects are added onto it now, and then Faris comes in, and he breaks the tension with his voice. The first words that he says is the agony, and then now we're into the song. The song itself is quite simple. And yeah, Faris is kind of going full on drama here. Like you could imagine flailing his arms around and all this stuff. And yeah, the chorus is a bit more catchy. It's this kind of like new wave kind of catchiness to it that's quite dark but still quite poppy. And yeah, it's this cacophony of like slightly horrible sounds that are made into something that actually, is quite poppy. It's quite strange. Yeah,
but it's still basically, for me, I was just like, this is just a discordant, dark, tarry slime.
Yeah, you're still talking about the song, or?
Oh, yes.
Your poo.
Let's never.
I said poppy, not pee-pee.
Yeah. Let's agree that over the course of these podcasts, that subject is never addressed.
We both know that cannot be promised. Poop always wins out. So yeah, they do like the classic thing they do quite often in this album. They have a bit of a breakdown, a bit of silence, not full on silence, but yeah, it kind of breaks down a little bit, and it's an excuse for them to suddenly start ramping up the pace, and it suddenly builds up this weird like excitement, which I'll show you a bit now. The guitar now becomes more and more like deranged, and yeah, it ends really well as well, and it's just one of the hidden gems, I would say, the album. It's not really your go-to track if you're kind of showing someone the album, but every time it comes on, I suddenly remember why I like it so much, if that makes sense. It's one of those tracks where you never go put it on specifically, and yet when it comes around, you're like, man, I really love that song. I should listen to it more, if that makes sense.
So what's going on with the lyrics here? Because we're into water again. New Ice Age.
Yeah, it's true. It's really weird, because you could kind of look at it as a very modern piece that talks about global warming. It sounds quite apocalyptic. I was wondering, is it like a drug thing, maybe? Or maybe I wonder if it's someone, seeing as a lot of these are about heartbreak, is this someone who feels as though they're cold and dead inside now, that something has had such an effect that they feel like they've been, spat out, as he says. But yeah, I mean, like you've got lines, like time is ticking, tick, 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 dead, a new ice age, closer day by day, will freeze when ice wings are swooping down. How we need it now, ice will make 1,000 sculptures and ice will spit them out. A lot about ice. It's, ice shocks the sleeping system, ice hits the deadbeat bar, ice hits the faceless enemies, ice strikes the cowering clowns. The coldest days will come, welcome to the Ice Age.
I mean, it's very apt for a song called New Ice Age.
That's true. There will never be a new Ice Age like this one, he says. And that could be Al Gore saying that, or Faris Badwan. It could be one or the other. I wouldn't be able to distinguish it. So, yeah, I'm not sure if I'm reading this wrong. Maybe someone out there knows really what it's about. But, yeah, I'm not quite sure.
Without
100%.
doing a deep analysis, it certainly looks like water is being used throughout as a sort of either something that's a gulf in a relationship or bringing despair or death.
Yeah, it's definitely a theme, a recurring theme within this album.
Which is good.
Yeah, it is good.
Themes.
Which is good. Yes. I never said otherwise.
Would you call this a concept album?
I don't know. I actually don't. I don't think so, by the way they seemingly were creating loads of songs that kind of sound the same and stuck them together. I don't think there's a... I think it's more just they're in that same thought, you know what I mean, that same headspace or whatever throughout, rather than they were sitting down thinking, right, what's this album about? What's it talking about?
I want to set out to make an album about water.
Yeah.
That wasn't consciously discussed.
Yeah. What are you going to call it? Primary colours.
That ought to throw them.
That'll get them going. And let's put a picture of us, but as if you're looking through it through water. How about that? On the front cover. Oh, maybe.
Yeah. XL. They liked it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So the next track, moving on, is to Scarlet Fields. So let's have a little bit of a listen to that. So I have to say this is probably one of my favourite songs off the album. It might be my favourite track off the album. Not sure, but for me, it's really up there. What did you think about it in comparison to the other songs that you've heard so far?
It's definitely one of the more melodic, poppier ones. Again, I think it's kind of one of the more like atypical songs that I would expect from a band in this kind of genre. It didn't have, like the ones that I like have a bit more of that like punky edge, the menace, and this felt very much like a bit of a retread to like some of the other poppier moments, all distilled into one tune. Yeah.
Yes. I can see that, yeah. I mean, I like how it starts with this weird reverse guitar, a bit of synth feedback, and then Faris you can kind of hear Faris talking in the background at some point. So it's almost as if they're preparing for something already, like right at the beginning of the song. Like they're not quite ready to even begin the song yet, which is quite strange and cool in its own way.
Yeah, the opening of the track's really different, wasn't it? Because suddenly you've got some like quite weird new sounds that we haven't heard before. It's quite alarming. I was like, what the hell is this going on? It sounds like Miss Saigon.
Yeah,
but it's good at this point in an album, track 6.
Yeah,
to get something a little bit fresh for your ears.
Yeah, it does always keep you guessing. The album, which is really good. It's then again, as you said, there's a strange sound. They've almost got like what sounds almost like a violin playing slightly off. I'm guessing it's another guitar effect, but yeah, it's almost like when you listen to it, it's almost like the weird muffled barking of a small dog. Really strange. but it's kind of like a noise, and it's the same thing as you were saying, like these strange sounds. It's a noise that demands your interest as you try and work out what it is. So without you even knowing about it, you're trying to place it, and so it's subconsciously bringing you into the song because you're not 100% clear what you're actually listening to.
Yeah, totally.
So your brain is working overtime trying to figure it out. But before you've even had time to really do that, this bass hook comes in again, something you're familiar with. And again, like it does on the other tracks, it kind of pulls you into the melody. And especially in this song, which is a bit more of like a Joy Division-y kind of style, air of melancholy, like throughout. And yeah, Faris' singing is a bit different here. It's slightly distorted and muffled again, but he's kind of giving it more, it sounds more empty and lazy almost. And then, yeah, when the pre-chorus comes in, it's pure kind of Kevin Shields' My Bloody Valentine. It's probably the closest to being a rip-off almost that you would kind of say. But it's weird because it kind of strangely scratches this itch that you've had in the space that it's left empty beforehand. It's like an oncoming storm building up to the chorus. And yeah, then the keyboard is playing something that's quite clear and bright and upbeat and poppy, while the guitar is offsetting it with its dirty, slight out of tune playing, and it sounds like it's almost at a different tempo. It's really weird. Then after like a second round, first chorus, we chill out. The synth is playing something that's quite nice and bright again. Everything's a bit more sweet here before Faris and the guitars come back in and that dirty chorus, which makes us feel really filthy again. So listen to it. This is the bit I'm talking about. So yeah, and once again, like with the tracks on this album, the bass line is consistently keeping you hooked and locked in, no matter what else is going on throughout the song. And then yeah, weirdly, like it ends with this the last note is this clear, like bright sound. It's almost like no matter what's just happened beforehand, it's one, like it's one at the end. I'll just quickly play it now.
Yeah, it's a victorious sounding song. It's almost like it was written for indie disco.
Yeah,
I can imagine a crowd of drunk kids kind of all raising their snake bite in black at the end of the night. Whee! I like that. You're right. It's got a really strong bass line all the way throughout. It's quite hooky, as in Peter Hook.
Yeah, it is literally. Yeah, and also like the lyrics here are some of my favourite actually, because it's quite poetic, and it sounds as if like for once on this album, a lot of it's about heartbreak or unrequited love or whatever, but this sounds like about someone who's completely in love, that they're almost taken to another land. It's slightly surreal and romantic, and they look at themselves from the adoring viewpoint of another and they enjoy it and embrace it, and it all looks so glorious until that last line, which is, so the line beforehand, I'll just go through it because it's not actually that long. As the summer fades away, you'll lead me to the garden, passing the lovers swooning in the autumn. See yourself, your image in the eyes of someone else. See yourself, your fears as they appear to someone else. When the sun sets on dark silhouettes, collapse into dream as summer fades away, laugh at my reflection, pass to a lover, seeking your affection. Though I know you won't be here for long.
Bit fatalistic.
Yeah.
He had a lovely little ditty there.
Yeah, it's just got that. Yeah, it's just a real tinge of sadness at the end. It's just turned, that last line has just turned the whole song on its head in a weird way, which is great. So it's like, is it a dream? Is it because he knows that love can be fleeting? Is it that she's truly leaving him or whatever? It just throws up all these questions in that last moment with that one line, and I think that's quite it's quite clever.
Yeah, that's a good technique. The one that springs to mind is Devo, Beautiful World,
Yeah.
where you basically make a song that sounds very optimistic and full of hope, and then you just undermine it all at the end with that one kind of like withering line.
What was the line at the end of A Beautiful World? I can remember the song, I don't remember the last line.
It's a beautiful world for you, but not for me.
I don't remember that bit.
What?
It's a beautiful world. That one,
Or
right?
you,
Oh, yeah.
not me.
Yeah, okay, no, I do remember that. Yeah, it's true, yeah. Just kind of this weird, completely turns the whole notion of it on its head. Yeah, so I quite like that song. It's probably one of my favourite ones on the album.
I know conceptually they've moved away from water. We're now in a field.
Yes, a bit more greener on this one. Nice
Green
garden.
earth.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering now if we'll get wind and fire over the course of the next 4 songs.
There's a lot of nature.
Yeah.
Kind of going on.
Or maybe heart. Maybe it's a Captain Planet themed album.
God, he does talk about love. Everything, all these songs really are about love in a weird way. More than water. Who'd have thought?
That's a funny thing for a person to be singing about.
Exactly. Give this guy a pint of love, and he's and water it down.
So I only think of you.
I only think of you. Let's listen to that for a sec. So, yeah, this is one that I would usually skip. It's actually a rather good song still, I think. It just takes its time to get there, and it's just that little bit too painfully slow for me to actually bother with, if that makes sense.
It's just too long, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it goes on for over 7 minutes. That's a long time.
Again, harping back to what I was saying about there are some roots in this like 60s sound and Phil Spector and everything. This to me sounds like the very long build-up of the Shirelles, Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow?
Yeah, I could kind of see that.
Tonight you're mine completely,
Yeah.
etc.
Except there's, 50 verses or something. Yeah.
But I feel like, I don't know if other people would hear it if they don't have that sort of song in their mind, although it's it's a song that everyone kind of knows. But
Yeah.
I feel like if you're aware of that song and you hear that, it kind of conjures it up, and then they can kind of play with that, sort of pastiche it a bit to sort of like undermine the message there, or not undermine it, but he tweak it into this like wrought kind of love song.
Yeah. It's
Or failed love.
Yeah, true. It's a weird one. I mean, again, like lyrically, it's about the death of a loved one. Has he killed her and gone to hell? Is he in some kind of purgatory? There's a weird desperation to it. There's like weird sense of failure. I wondered if it was actually someone trying to support someone else with an addiction, maybe. And there's just a slight stalkerish obsession with it, Talk about, it's a long, long, long way down. I found you on your side. Don't go because I'll follow. If I lose you, I'll go mad. It's so lonely coming down. So, as the flames wash around me, there's your fire you were talking about. I only think of you. I only want to save you. So it's a bit of a weird thing, and ends with like, I will carry you home, which is kind of romantic, but it's also, from what's preceded it, it's a little bit off, a little bit weird.
Well, it's just the person's dead, or at least very tired.
Yeah, true. Maybe it's just about a sleepy dog. I don't know.
It's been for a particularly long and deep swim.
Yeah, in the sea of desperation. See, there's a strong. It's kind of like, it's quite minimalist. There's a strong bass. It's not much drums. It keeps the song quite empty, at least to begin with. And then this violin like guitar comes in. It's quite strange, a bit off, as it's been throughout the whole album, really. I would say it's probably the most Jesus and Mary Chain sounding song. Faris is crooning a lot. And you can also hear some kind of like double bass playing in the background as well. Everything's quite slightly deep and dark. But the only thing that really keeps it interesting musically, there's like at one point the bass goes up an octave. That keeps it slightly varied. The guitar bends out of tune a little bit again to try and maintain some kind of interest. The bass starts doing its own thing near the end of the song. It's playing staccato. It's almost like it's glitching out a little bit. We hear more of the string section creeping in, kind of still making us a bit uneasy, but there's definitely this sense of waves again, and this constant build and break. So it kind of the song's kind of slow, but in its own weird way, it's satisfying by having these ups and downs, these crescendos and build-ups and crescendos again. So it's never, it's quite slow and boring when you're looking at it at 7 minutes of kind of the same thing. But when you're in the middle of it, it's not too bad.
Yeah, and within the context of the album, I like albums that clearly have an ebb and flow. And for me, the placement of this is quite nice. And if you're kind of shutting off and you're willing to let this album just kind of like pass by you, this is actually a nice kind of come down at this point in the album, and it's got time to move and breathe. I like the concept of what they've tried to do with this track, but I think maybe just like the execution of it, it's not quite enough, or maybe it's too long to quite hold my interest.
Yeah.
Maybe 5 minutes of this would have been nice.
Yeah, exactly. It's a nice break, as you said, but it's not enough to kind of keep me going. Right, so the next one is I Can't Control Myself. So let's hear a little bit of that. Yeah, what are your thoughts on I Can't Control Myself?
I really like this. This might be one of my favourite tracks. Mm-hmm. It's pretty straightforward. I think it's like the most kind of like garagey or ostensibly kind of garage rock track. It's got a really kind of like lewd and indecent lurch to it. I just thought it was really fun.
Yeah, it sounds like more of a you track. I would say I can kind of hear the aspects of it that I know, the stuff that you like. So it begins with this like distorted bass line, and for a second you think it's going to go into a more traditional punky sound, and then that strange organ pulses in time with the beat, whilst the guitars are a lot more high end here, and they're a lot more scratchy, and they're played a bit more traditionally than the other tracks. They're not as they haven't got that sweeping soundscape song. They're more like an actual guitar, if that makes sense. It's kind of more akin with their former sound. I'd say it's more like the first album out of all the other tracks. It sounds like a 60s kind of garage sound. It's a bit more dirty, and the vocals sound like they could be from that era too. But yeah, I mean, the second chorus is a bit more added to it, and then there's some reverse delay guitar playing that sounds like it shouldn't belong, which is quite cool. It's not really and there's not really a solo, but it kind of plays the part of one. And yeah, by the end of the song, the organ isn't quite in time, and it again starts making you feel slightly weird. And by that time, the song's finished. It's really strange. It's not like a massive impact, but it's quite like a nice bridge between the two sounds of both albums, and would probably please fans from the first album who maybe don't quite like the new sound, as well as people who obviously do like the new album. It's quite a nice like in-betweeny song.
certainly doesn't outstay its welcome.
No, yeah.
It's short. After that big, long, I Only Think of You.
Yeah.
It's nice to get this. It's like a little palate cleanser and a Boosh.
Yeah, it does. It works really nicely here, especially after the song before, I Only Think of You. Lyrically, it's weird because this has the phrase Scarlet Fields in it, and yeah, obviously it's not the song Scarlet Fields. It sounds like it's someone in a frenzy trying to ask for help. There's a lot of romantic imagery here, but it sounds like it's almost someone having a breakdown, basically, or some kind of existential crisis. At first I thought it was about someone being quite passionate about someone else, but I'm not sure. So it's all, it's called I Can't Control Myself. So that's obviously a bit of a hint as to the frenzied nature of it. But, I tear myself in two. I pray for Scarlet Fields to save me. Whole and white and pure, I can't control myself. A dream of lost desires. I drive myself insane, etc. Shadows burst in flames. With a cry, I call your name. It's all like a little bit OTT, if that makes sense.
It's very melodramatic.
Yeah.
Which, fits in with the rest of the album. But I think here he's really gone all out with it. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a good track. It's a good one, and it's a bit weird, especially because the track afterwards, which is Primary Colours. Let's have a little listen to that. The song off the album Primary Colours. Dan, what did you think?
Again, a bit like Scarlet Fields. I kind of felt like this is something I've heard before. It sounds quite commercial. I can see why it would be the title track. All in all, it didn't really do that much for me.
It's okay. I kind of feel the same. It sounds like it could be like an 80s pop song. It's like the style of The Cure or something like that, but it doesn't quite fit, but it's kind of similar kind of thing, I guess. Sweeping guitars are back. The synth and the bass keep it quite bright and happy, yet it's still kind of dark in its own weird way. The vocals, again, are playing the part of something that's quite poppy and happy as well. It's sung again as if it's almost celebratory, and it's quite catchy as well. And then you have this weird, like, toned down post-chorus part that's, almost bringing you into the deeper sadness that lays behind the song, as if like this is the truth. And then all of a sudden we're back into the poppy bit again. This is the bit I'm talking about.
As he falls asleep, the colored lights will keep unwanted vigil over. Where he is, we don't know where he is. The amount of a million, now everyone needs him.
Yeah, so it kind of, when it gets into like the second time round, it goes into like a David Lynch style, highly reverbed surf guitar, and it feels quite. It starts feeling very sad again before the jubilant verse. So it's almost as if the song is bipolar. it's quite the swing between one and the other. It kind of plays your mood. It really makes you feel like it makes you feel like afterwards you've been on a bit of a journey in a really weird way. Just because you're swinging from one emotion to the next, just tonally quite different. It's weird, but it's also, it's the little touches. You'll notice like the guitar bends out of tune after each time he sings Primary Colours, like the actual lyric, as if symbolising the battle within the song between the happiness and sadness. It's it's quite I don't know, it's quite interesting. Like lyrically, it sounds a bit like a medieval poem. But essentially, this Messiah-like man seems to be struggling internally with this position that he's found himself in, and he seems to be paranoid and insecure, and yet he remains in this position and is adored by the sounds of it. And then I was thinking, is it like a commentary on dealing with the pressure of fame? Maybe. I'm not sure.
Which would be a bit left field at this point in the album to introduce that as a kind of theme.
Yeah, and it is a little bit. It's like, it's one of the lyrics, newest Messiah rolled into one, cover his shoulders in primary colours, which you imagine is like a regal kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then, like, the bits, it talks about, like, but as he falls asleep, the coloured lights will keep unwanted vigil over where he is. He doesn't know where he is. And those are like those quiet, weird moments. So it's like this jubilant thing during the day, and at night he's like by himself thinking, I don't know what I'm fucking doing. God, where am I? Like, what's even going on? And then all of a sudden it's daylight, and he's got to act like the happy king, and demands of a million. Everyone needs him. Sycophants send him to the edge of reason. Everyone knows him. He knows himself better. And then at the end, riding through town on a chariot high, glory adorned and immortalised in primary colours. So he's won out, even if he's insecure at night. He seems to be doing all right by the end of the song. But you're right, it does take a weird shift. I don't really know. It's not about love, or maybe it is. I don't know.
You just can't tell with this fella. He's all very poetic. He could be going on about anything.
Yeah. So C within a C. So, C within a C. I think it's great. It's got quite a slow build. It's a little bit funky as well, and it's a little bit louder on the low end. The bass kind of acts a bit like a kick drum of its own, while in the highs and the mids, the guitar and cymbals and synths, play along. Ferris's vocals sound slightly distant. Again, he sounds like someone who's hurt, who's going through some kind of emotional trauma, but it's all on top of a melody that keeps going in, slightly strange places. Notes that aren't quite hitting what we're expecting. It just makes us feel a bit uneasy. The cymbals act as a kind of, almost like a high-end kick here, whilst there's a sub-bass kind of coming in and out, and it's just playing with the whole spectrum of sound here. Drums are quite solid. It's got some nice, interesting fills. And, there's just a cacophony of sounds before it breaks down and falls apart, and it just leaves the kick and the bass. And then that's when the song changes, basically, completely. A synth comes in. It's quite German, krautrock, 80s. And then, suddenly we're in a new song. There's so much reverb on Ferris's voice here. But also like there's a clean version as well, so you can actually hear what he's saying properly. And then we're into this song. A bass synth comes in, which complements the former synth, and now we're playing like both sides of the EQ. For some reason, the Faris makes here I quite like. I'm not sure if they're supposed to be quite childish and playful, but the song is kind of building up here, and they lump in another kind of mid-synth quite slyly. You kind of hear like a trumpet sound in the background, which makes it this kind of thing of being sad yet triumphant. And yeah, round and round it goes until it falls away to leave just the synths by itself. It's almost as if it's like almost focusing you on the great melody that they've just been playing and just kind of isolating that by itself. And that's it. So yeah, it's one of my more favourite tracks from the album. But yeah, what did you think about it?
Yeah, I really liked it. We've used the term shoegaze a lot, but we haven't spoken about psychedelic rock. For me, this has got a really strong, like, authentic 60s psychedelia kind of sound coming in there. It really, I think as well, kind of has this strange, almost like distance, like emotionally. Even though there's all this exciting, like, rich sound going on and lots of change, everything, there's something quite languid, almost, aloof, if that makes sense. It's really, it's a really great song that you can, like, just really lose yourself in, as opposed to, the other song we spoke about earlier. Which one was it? I Only Think of You. There's something going on here from second to second to keep you absorbed and interested. I can really hear Jeff Barrow all over this as well. This, to me, it's got a similar sound to a lot of the Beak material, and you can hear all those influences that he loves. You can hear them all in this one song. You can hear the, like, distorted surf rock, the garage rock, psychedelic, shoegaze. It's all in here. It's a distillation of everything that's a kind of across that whole album. And I thought it was cool that it brings the album to full circle, because we started with all that long textured build up with Mirror's Image, and we kind of get it here. I do like a nice big long epic album closer, so it's very satisfying.
I wonder what you were going to say then.
I thought it was interesting that this was also the sort of lead song from the album.
Yeah, it's the first one, the first inkling that people got of where they were going.
I mean, it's quite a bold move to put this out first. It's not exactly the obvious, like, choice of single, is it? No,
but it does kind of sum up what they're trying to do, if you know what I mean. It's quite a nice, warm entry, like, minus the first song. They're kind of making it obvious that this is like a bit more of an arty composition.
Yeah. I mean, how did you feel when you heard this for the first time? Was this the first song that you heard from the album?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. So it was. I remember being really excited about it, and the music video that accompanies it, which is quite like Andy Warhol-y, it plays with projections on the band and stuff. It's a bit Velvet Underground or whatever. I was just like, this is cool. Like, this is totally what I want at this moment in time. And yeah, like, and when the album actually ended up coming out, I was working at MTV at the time, and it definitely has that nostalgia. It takes me back to that time where I was literally listening to it every morning on the way to work. And yeah, it was great. It was really, like, a big part of my life at that point.
Yeah.
And yeah, Sea Within a Sea was definitely, like, kick-started that excitement for what was yet to come.
And did the album deliver on that excitement?
Yeah, it did, yeah, massively. I remember not long afterwards as well, I think I was at Reading Festival when they were playing. And yeah, they pretty much, like, I want to say they only did like 2 tracks or whatever off Strange House maybe, and the rest of it was made up of stuff off this album. And I remember it must have only come out like a little while beforehand, but I absolutely played it to death. And there weren't that many people there in the audience. There was enough, but it was the Radio 1 tent, I think it was. But yeah, it was like in the middle of the day or something stupid. And I remember when I was hearing those songs live, I was like, man, this is like bliss. This is amazing. It's really, really good. Yeah, and it really did deliver. But yeah, there's the 2 extra songs, right?
That's true. If you're in Japan, that is, of course. So I've been skirting around looking on Discogs because I like to kind of burrow around and look at weird editions and things. That's kind of my whole bag. And there aren't that many, actually, of this album. I was surprised. It came out in 2009. It doesn't seem to have ever been like reissued or repressed or anything. But this original 2009 Japanese CD, it came with the video for Sea Within a Sea, and 2 bonus tracks, You Could Never Tell and A Whole New Way.
Yeah.
I don't know if people are aware, but Japanese CDs always have bonus tracks on. It's kind of an incentive, because in Japan it's actually cheaper to buy an imported Western CD. So to give Japanese record labels a foothold in the market, they're required to throw these extra tracks on. So after the kind of like beautifully curated and climactic Sea Within the Sea, boom, you get these 2 extra songs tacked on the end.
And they're not great. What was the name of the Whole New World?
Whole New Way.
Whole New Way.
Whole New Way. What did you think about it?
It's out of the 2, it's the better one. It's kind of a step towards what would become their sound with Skying and other albums down the line. But it's pretty forgettable, and it just doesn't match the tone of what had just come beforehand.
Yeah, I can see why they didn't include it. I thought it was quite a good song, but it doesn't quite fit on the album. And I quite like that kind of thing, like as a record collector, when a band's got a song from the album sessions that they think strong, but they're also like brave enough not to include it on the album because they feel it doesn't quite fit with the flow. And I feel like that's what may have happened here. It's very commercial sounding, so actually it makes a perfect single. And this was released in the UK as a standalone single in November. So again, I can see like XL, maybe the record label, coming in going, let's just hold that off. After the initial push for the album, 8 months later, you've got this kind of like new song dropping as a one-off 7-inch single, which is pretty cool, I think. To use another like, Tears for Fears example, it's kind of like The Way You Are of the Horrors back catalogue.
Yeah. A Whole New World and The Way You Are. That's how it is.
The other track was You Could Never Tell.
You Can Never Tell, and it's pretty shit.
Yeah, it's just a throwaway, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Shame, really, they have to kind of include it on stuff. But, I mean, it's okay. It's all right, but there's nothing to it. You can see why they didn't really do anything with it. It's okay. What do you think about it?
That's it.
Are you all right?
It's just a bit of fluff, really. It's just like zippy little guitar song, totally inconsequential.
Meh. Yeah, totally meh.
Inoffensive.
So I mean, I have to say it's still one of my favourite albums, I would say, of perhaps all time. I would go as far as to say that. I still enjoy listening to it. But yeah, as a newcomer to this album, what did you think?
I was really pleasantly surprised. As I said earlier, didn't really have a good idea of what the Horrors were, what they were about. Had made some assumptions based on the kind of scene at the time and their whole aesthetic look. But I was really pleasantly surprised. There's a ton of stuff in here, the kind of influences that I really enjoy. Like I said, all that like kind of 60s, Phil Spector-ish kind of stuff, psychedelic rock, post-punk, shoegazy stuff, all those textures, lots of hooks. It's just a bit of a kind of like big post-punk pop behemoth. And I'd recommend it to people if you like the sound of that. There's just tons and tons to enjoy in here.
Any high points and low points?
For me, I think my favourite songs, I liked those ones that kind of were a bit discordant, had that nasty edge, a bit of like anger and bitterness. So New Ice Age. And then I'd say, Sea Within the Sea, I think, is that epic track with all that stuff going on. I think that's a high watermark.
Yeah. Low points?
I think some of the kind of like more jangly, kind of commercial...
Jangly.
Those kind of popular songs, Who can say Scarlet Fields?
Are your low points?
Are my low points, yeah. I mean, they're not bad songs. They're just... they're a bit kind of like typical.
Yeah, which coincide with my high points. My two favourite songs, I'd say, probably off the album. Push Came to Shove. I can. Who can say would probably be my favourite, just because I just think it's a really great song. Yeah, and it's Scarlet Fields would probably be the only competitor. Really, I just think I just like the melody, basically.
Well, this bodes well for the future of our podcast.
Yes. Disagreement breeds beautiful things. So that's all we can hope for. Low points. God, I don't know. Like the kind of the midsection, it feels a bit flabby. At some points in the about the 2/3 mark. Like I Only Think of You and all that.
Yeah, that's where it gets a little bit lost.
Yeah, good. Some of that, I think, just shave some of that off, and it could have been a bit tighter all round.
Yeah, like we said, it's nice, but it just keeps them going. You're like, for God's sake, come on, just get on with it, Fritzl.
Yeah, or just do Fritzl, or just do something different. But yeah, well, that's it. That's the Horrors, Primary Colours. Any other words to add about that?
I'm going to go back and listen to their first album.
Yes, that's a good idea. Yeah, I was saying maybe we should do it as another episode, but I feel like we're done with that album now. I think we've done justice to it over the course of the hours I think we've just we've spent on it. You could have just listened to it. So thanks for listening to A New Winter. You can follow us on Twitter at A New Winter. If you want to say anything about the album, if you thought we were wrong, we were right, or anything like that, then you can email us at newwinterpodcast@gmail.com. We're on Instagram at A New Winter. You should also go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/anewwinter, because there's loads of tiers there where you can get involved with lots more stuff. There's premium podcasts and all this. But the main thing is that you're listening, so please do review and rate the podcast on your platform of choice. Dan, where can the guys find you?
At Dreadful Discs on Instagram, and also Dreadful Discs on YouTube, which is a bit of a new endeavour for me. Hopefully going to be kind of picking a few artists and just talking people through my vinyl collection in quite a geeky way. But if you like all that kind of detail around like specific editions or pressings, I get quite excited about looking at the packaging and just sort of like bleating on in a kind of geeky way.
Yeah, and links to all that stuff will be in the show notes as well. So that's it. Thanks everyone for listening, and but go across the sea. May the sea fare you well. Goodbye.
Goodbye.